Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Sake on Air. My name is Frank Walter, and today we're going to be talking all things shochu. Whenever I try to explain shochu, I feel like I'm about to start an argument with Diogenes the cynic who's holding a chicken. This is because defining shochu is like trying to define what a person is. To be honest, it's actually a myriad of beverages tied together more by historical circumstance than fundamental similarities. So, the characters that make up shochu literally mean burned alcohol. And this is because shochu is entirely distilled. It's a distilled beverage, not a brewed beverage like sake. From there, shochu can be broken up into type A shochu and type B shochu. Type A shochu is multiply distilled and not the subject of this video. Type B is singly distilled and can be further split up into honkaku shochu and non-honkaku shochu. This video is just about honkaku shochu. Honkaku is authentic in Japanese and refers to shochu made in a way that is in line with historical production techniques. The based mash must have some sort of koji-based fermentation going on and be distilled only once and be made only from ingredients that are on the list of the approved shochu ingredients by the Japanese tax agency. As of 2026, those ingredients are as follows: ashitaba, azuki beans, sweet clover, aloe, oolong tea, plum pits, enoki mushrooms, seed carrots, pumpkin, milk, ginkgo nuts, kuzu starch, bear grass, chestnuts, green peas, acorns, sesame seeds, kelp, saffron, cactus, shiitake mushrooms, shiso, daikon radish, skim milk powder, onions, horned seaweed, smooth seaweed, horse chestnut seeds, tomatoes, date, palm, fruits, carrots, green onions, nori, green peppers, water chestnuts, sunflower seeds, butterbur seeds, safflower, whey powder, Chinese hollyhock, matatabi, matcha, matataba tree seeds, lily buds, mugwort, peanuts, green tea, lotus root, buckwheat, and wakame. In addition, of course, to the major ingredients of sweet potato, barley, rice, brown sugar, and sake leaves. That is a lot. The variety is not all what it seems, however, as most honkaku shochu will be made with at least one of the final 5 ingredients. The shochu made from the more exotic ingredients is usually made to catch the eye of a non-shochu enjoyer or as a regional promotional product rather than a major type of shochu. Personally, I like imo or sweet potato shochu the best, but it took me a long time to really understand the appeal. I had to actually live on the remote island of Tanegashima for 10 months before I really became a shochu enjoyer. Shochu's reputation in Japan is still kind of an old man's drink, although a lot of distilleries have modernized their labels and are creating more flavors that are much more palatable to a regular kind of younger Japanese person. And they're also focusing on a palate that is kind of used to something more high proof. So Western spirits like whiskey, vodka, rum, or using a shochu in a cocktail rather than just drinking it in the traditional way. Very little honkaku shochu is drunk straight. At about 25% alcohol, that is not to say that it is difficult to drink straight, more that in Japanese drinking culture, food and alcohol are inseparable. To that end, mellowing out the aroma and the flavors of shochu with various types of water, frozen, cold, sparkling, hot, noodle, or other liquids like juice or coffee is the most common. Starting out on the rocks. Although not terribly traditional, as frozen water being hard to come by until at least the late 1800s, when Japan opened to the world and could buy ice from American and Scandinavian ice merchants. But today there are distillers that make shochu intended to be drunk on ice alone, and some higher proof shochu are particularly tasty this way, kind of matching a rum or whiskey on the rocks. Mizuwari is a much more common and traditional way of enjoying honkaku shochu. It's made by adding a skosh of shochu to your water or a skosh of water to your shochu. Say that fast 5 times. Called mizuwari, the exact ratio of water to shochu varies by region and person. The most common is rokuyon, or 6 parts shochu to 4 parts water. This brings the whole beverage to about 15% ABV and lets the shochu flavors lengthen out in the dilution. Oita is actually known for a 3-to-7 ratio for barley shochu, which makes a much weaker beverage, around 7.5 ABV, almost like a strong beer. I personally like a half and half ratio of water to shochu, if I can get my hands on some interesting water beyond what is just coming out of the tap. Maiwari, which is my preferred style, is a variation of mizuwari. This is when you add your preferred ratio of shochu and water to an empty bottle or pitcher and let them get to know each other for a few days before actually drinking it. I usually store mine in the fridge so it's nice and cold whenever I want a refresher on the weekend or with dinner. Sodawari. Sodawari is adding a bit of sparkling water to shochu and is more modern overall. The bubbles tend to lighten the shochu and bring out aroma. I like a heavier potato shochu mixed with soda water as a way to beat the muggy heat of the Japanese summer. Chuhais, which are mostly made with type A shochu, are a variation on sodawari. Chuhai is a shortening of shochu highball and often has like fruit juice or syrups added to it. I think that honkaku shochu can make a good chuhai, but it's kind of a minority opinion because you are adding extra things and it's not just the shochu, it's some grapefruit juice and the shochu. So it really is kind of difficult to find a good honkaku shochu that makes a good chuhai. Oyuwari is another very traditional way to drink shochu. The way to make it is to heat water up to 70 to 80 degrees Celsius and then pour that into a cup before adding the shochu. Adding the shochu second will cause the shochu actually to mix with the water as it sinks to the bottom of the cup due to the difference in specific gravity between the water and the shochu. The final beverage should be around 40 to 50 Celsius, so like not as hot as a tea or a coffee, but decidedly not room temperature. I feel that oyuwari really boosts the aromas of shochu quite significantly compared to other drinking styles. You really get a lot of those esters coming off of the beverage because as the molecules in the shochu are actually heated up, they're going to be bouncing off of the surface and vaporizing into the air and then getting right up into your nostrils. Atsukan, which is heating the shochu rather than the water, is also a thing, but it's nowhere near as common as making atsukan sake or hot sake. You could take that hot shochu and pour it on ice, which is actually going to create a different flavor than if you were heating up the water and mixing it with a room temperature shochu or heating up a diluted mix of water and shochu. There's a lot of different ways that temperature can be played with shochu, just like you can play with temperature with sake. So I wasn't joking when I said noodle water. Soba-yu, which is the hot water left over from boiling soba noodles, can actually be mixed with shochu to create a variation of sorts on oyuwari shochu. The noodle water is full of starches, and the drink ends up having a creamy mouthfeel because of it. The heat still intensifies the aroma of the shochu, but you're only really going to find this style at soba shops because no one is just going to be boiling noodles to use for soba-yu wari. With all the ways to drink shochu, pairing with food, I think, adds a whole nother layer of complexity. Let us know in the comments what food and shochu combinations you like best. For all the talk of shochu being Japan's indigenous spirit, most of the evidence of its inception indicates that distillation technology came to Japan via a reverse Silk Road. The first properly distilled alcohols that we know of are mentioned in books written in Baghdad during the 9th century. Later, but still during the Islamic Golden Age, an ethanol-based distillate called arak started to be made. This spirit and the technology of how to make it spread slowly east into China, India, and Southeast Asia. How it got to Japan is actually still unknown. The 1477 section of the Veritable Records of the Joseon Dynasty, which is a historical book from Korea, mentions that the people in the Ryukyu Kingdom, which is Okinawa, were drinking distilled alcohol. This is likely the precursor to awamori, a different spirit that we'll talk about in a different episode. The Ryukyu Kingdom is what Okinawa was before it was fully taken over by Japan in 1872. But anyway, it was known to have significant trade relations all across East and Southeast Asia, and particularly with the kingdom of Siam, which is now what we call Thailand. The same Korean record mentions that distilled alcohol was being sold to the Ryukyu Kingdom from Thailand, and that it is thought that local production started as a way to reduce the cost of importing the precious spirits. But that is actually just one theory of many. All the other main theories posit that distillation technology, like many other technologies brought to Japan, came from the East Asian mainland. Japan had relations with the various Chinese dynasties and Korean kingdoms. The technology to make a sort of proto-shochu could have come to Kyushu any number of ways, and likely more than once. We do know that in 1546, Jorge Alvarez mentioned Japanese people drinking an arak-like beverage made from rice. Alvarez was the Portuguese explorer who is credited as being the first European to reach China by sea. He also visited Japan and wrote about what he saw there. The oldest mention of shochu in Japanese was actually discovered in 1954. Construction workers on repairing a shrine in Kagoshima Prefecture discovered the following carved into one of the beams. The chief Shinto priest of the shrine was so stingy that he never gave us shochu to drink. Basically, the carving indicates that shochu was a common beverage and expected to be given to workers if they're working on a particular project, like rebuilding or making a shrine building. The carving actually has been dated to 1559 and backs up Alvarez's slightly earlier observations that in southern Japan at least, shochu was the alcohol of choice. During the Edo period, shochu production spread around the country even as the sake industry was also taking off. There are records from at least 1696 describing the practice of adding shochu to sake to help it last longer and potentially pack a little more of an alcoholic punch. But it wasn't until the 1700s that we get the first records of the most voluminous style of shochu today, sweet potato or imo shochu. Sweet potatoes are a product of the Columbian Exchange, so there was no way that Japan was getting them before the introduction of trade with the Portuguese and other Westerners in the 1540s. Global trade has actually been happening for a very long time, and even though shochu is an indigenous spirit, it is also a product of the globalization that began in the 1500s. Anyway, shochu production continued to increase during the long peace of the Tokugawa shogunate, and many different kinds of starch were used for the shochu mash. Everything changed, however, with the restoration of Emperor Meiji to ruler of Japan in 1868. The new Japanese government needed cash, and they needed it now. To raise funds, the Meiji state industrialized silk and tea production to sell to foreign traders, and began to really regulate and modernize the alcohol industry. In 1895, the patent or continuous still was introduced to Japan, and Type A shochu came into being in 1910. But the government was focused on volume, not flavor, not heritage. In fact, it was not until the 1970s that most Japanese people started to develop an interest in the traditional singly distilled shochu styles that we now call honkaku shochu. Innovation in this very traditional industry often happens and starts and jumps, but I think that the future of shochu is really very exciting. That'll do it for this episode of Sake on Air. If you enjoyed it, please do leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already, because that will help us out a lot. And if you have any questions about shochu or anything else in the sake world, please do leave a comment. We do check those out. So until next time, Kampai. Sake on Air is made with the generous support of the Japan Shochu and Sake Makers Association, located in downtown Tokyo near Toranomon Station.